At the dawn of the first millennium, the area now occupied by the sprawling housing estates of Redditch was a sparsely populated part of the kingdom of the Dubunai tribe, enveloped by the forest of Feckenham. Despite the changes that have taken place in the 2,000 years since, evidence of early Iron Age settlement of the region can still be found on the edge of the modern town. On the hilltop at Beeley, opposite the church, these deep ditches are thought to be the remains of an ancient British hill fort. In times of danger, the scattered population would retreat to the safety of its defences, and at certain times of the year would gather here to carry out their religious rites, including perhaps human sacrifice, under the careful supervision of their high priests, the mysterious Druids. Offerings to the gods and earthen ramparts, though, prove no defence against the ruthless efficiency of the legions of the Roman Emperor Claudius, who invaded Britain in 43 AD. Within a decade, the Dubunai were a subjugated people, and no doubt their labour was utilised by the Roman engineers when they built their road from Chesterfield to Bourton-on-the-Water. For part of its route, Icknield Street passed the foot of Church Hill at Beeley. It's thought the Romans may have established an outpost on the site of the ancient British hill fort to protect traffic on the road through this desolate part of their empire. From here, its southward route took the road through what are now the far from desolate suburbs of Redditch, running alongside the modern road that also carries its name. Early in the 5th century, after 400 years of occupation, Roman troops were recalled to defend Rome itself from barbarian attack, leaving Britain a sitting duck for a new breed of invader. Angles, Saxons and Jutes sailed across the North Sea in increasing numbers, forcing the Romano-British further and further west, and eventually into the Celtic fringe of Cornwall and Wales. The Anglo-Saxons probably reached this area via the old Roman road and established their own settlements overlooking the River Arrow, which was vital to their survival. The names Beeley and Ipsley are both Old English. Lee indicates a clearing in the forest. The Saxons were heathens, but missionaries from Rome and Ireland gradually converted them to Christianity, and the churches at Beeley and Ipsley stand on the sites of earlier Saxon churches. The track leading from Ipsley Church down to the Arrow was the high street of the ancient village. Anglo-Saxon control of England came to an end at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. In 1086, the new Norman king, William the Conqueror, ordered a great survey of his newly won land. The Domesday Survey, as it was called, provides a glimpse of life in this region in late Saxon times. The lands of Osberne, son of Richard Hugh, holds 3 hides in Ipsley. There is land for 7 ploughs. In Hugh's demesne is 1 plough and 7 slaves. There are 7 villeins and 1 priest and 13 cottagers having 4 ploughs. Here is a mill worth 16 pence. Nearby Washford Mill was also mentioned in the Domesday Book, and also has Anglo-Saxon origins. As well as efficient organisers and ruthless oppressors, the Normans also made many grants to religious establishments. William I gave the manor of Bearley to Pershaw Abbey, and in 1140 Waleran de Beaumont, Earl of Worcester, granted land in the Arrow Valley to the Cistercian Abbey at Garendon in Leicestershire. The Cistercians carefully surveyed the marshy, inhospitable floodplain of the Arrow and made plans to build an abbey. They diverted the river, creating fish ponds to supply food and a separate pool to power a watermill. A clever system of drainage ditches was engineered, and a site for the monastery buildings was levelled, all entirely by hand. The monks ran 20 surrounding farms called granges, including Hewell Grange, and made their living by renting out land and selling surplus produce. The Cistercians were renowned for their sheep farming, and records show that Bordesley Abbey wool was in demand by the finest continental weavers. Among the other industries undertaken by the monks of Bordesley were a variety of metalwork trades, including nail and needle making, for which the mill provided the power. King John was a regular visitor to his hunting lodge at nearby Feckenham, and became aware of the growing wealth of the abbey. Never slow to take an opportunity to raise extra taxes, in 1210 he forced the abbot to hand over a huge amount of silver. Nevertheless, Bordesley Abbey continued to flourish. At its peak, its annual income was around £400, from vast estates stretching from the Birmingham Plateau to the Cotswolds. As the abbey prospered, a settlement grew up at its gates. A well-known local landmark was a bright orange stream, coloured by the clay it runs through, and known as the Red Ditch, a name adopted by the little settlement outside the abbey. The inhabitants of Red Ditch were largely dependent on the monks for their livelihood, working as labourers on the abbey estates and providing other services. They also benefited from regular acts of charity. When a monk died, his allowance of food was distributed at the abbey gate for 30 days, that the poor might pray for his soul. On account of one of their benefactors, the monks of Bordesley gave away 100 pairs of shoes annually. A small chapel dedicated to St. Stephen stood just inside the gateway to the abbey, and may have been used by the people of Redditch. By 1332, there were 34 monks, 1 novice, and 17 serving men at Bordesley. But ravages of plague, bad management, and growing debts saw its numbers dwindle to 14 50 years later. The abbey never fully recovered from these setbacks, and its glory days were past, although its importance to the local economy continued. Another important site in the locality of medieval Redditch was a large timbered hall known as Moon's Moat, from the moat that surrounded it. The owners of the hall, which gave its name to a suburb of the modern town, cleared an area of forest and farmed the land from the early 13th century. The 15th century brought another influential family to the region. In about 1470, William Sheldon inherited the lordship of Bearley and built a large family home there, from where successive generations would make their own contribution to Redditch's history. Sheldon sided with the Yorkists during the turbulent Wars of the Roses and fought alongside Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Unfortunately for him, Yorkist ambitions came to an end when Richard III was slain on Bosworth Field. Under the Lancastrian Henry Tudor, now Henry VII, all supporters of the former king were deprived of their estates. After demonstrating his allegiance to the new regime, though, the Sheldon land was returned, although if Henry Tudor had looked a little closer, he may not have been so benevolent. The white rose of York displayed in the northeast window of Bearley Church is a lasting symbol of where William's true loyalty lay. It was William Sheldon II, born in 1491, that re-established the family fortunes after the temporary setback of the Wars of the Roses. He married Mary Willington from a wealthy Cotswold wool family and settled in Bearley in the early 1530s. While the Sheldons' fortunes were on the up, the opposite was true of Bordesley Abbey. Henry VIII's desire to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had caused a rift with Rome, with the king declaring himself head of the church in England. Establishments with allegiance to the Pope, including the monasteries, were dissolved and their estates seized and sold off or distributed among Henry's closest supporters. In 1538, Bordesley Abbey was given up without fuss to the king's commissioners. In return for their compliance, the ordinary monks were given a lifelong pension of around £5 a year, and the abbot, John Day, £20. John Day and one of his priests, Richard Whittington, settled in Bearley under the patronage of the Sheldon family. Whittington served as vicar of St. Lawrence Church from 1539 until 1550. Bordesley Abbey's estates now passed to the Crown and became part of the manor of Tardybig in the Royal Forest of Feckenham. Bordesley, though, was far too remote to interest Henry VIII. Furthermore, without the constant maintenance provided by the monks, the marsh was beginning to reassert itself. The king prevailed on Lord Windsor of Stanwell to exchange his estate for the manor of Feckenham. Not wishing to upset the temperamental monarch, Lord Windsor reluctantly agreed and moved his family north. They built a grand mansion at Hewell Grange, from where they would exert an influence over the region for generations to come. With the abbey dissolved, the people of the little settlement of Redditch had no reason to occupy the marshy valley and moved lock, stock and barrel to a hilltop a mile to the north, plundering the old abbey for stone to build new houses. Perhaps some of the deposed monks integrated with the locals and took their metalworking skills, including needle-making, into the community. Certainly Redditch's connection with the abbey continued, with the old gateway chapel of St. Stephen still serving as the local place of worship. Meanwhile, William Sheldon was exploring a new business opportunity. Much of the wool produced on his father-in-law's Cotswold sheep farms was sent to Flanders, where it was woven into high-quality tapestries and sold to wealthy English families at extortionate prices. Sheldon sent his son Ralph to Flanders to learn the skills of tapestry weaving. He proved a capable student and even persuaded some Flemish weavers to move to Bearley to further the craft. The family leased the few remaining buildings of Bordesley Abbey and set up tapestry weaving workshops here, the first in England. The Sheldons became synonymous with fine tapestry, and their products began to match the best Flanders could offer. In 1557, Ralph Sheldon married Anne Throckmorton of Coton Hall. The Throckmortons were staunch Catholics and would only agree to the union if Ralph converted to Catholicism. He became Lord of the Manor in 1570 on the death of his father and embarked on the building of the Sheldon Chapel in St. Lawrence Church. Although St. Lawrence was an Anglican church, the Sheldon Chapel was used for Catholic services, an act of treason in the reign of the Protestant Elizabeth I, and therefore conducted with great caution. Not enough, though, it seems. Ralph Sheldon's religious leanings came to the attention of the Queen's Commissioners, and he found himself locked up in the Marshalsea prison. His redoubtable wife came to his rescue and persuaded the authorities to release him into the custody of the Dean of Westminster. Ralph was given his freedom after agreeing to become an Anglican. On his return to Bearley, he immediately reaffirmed his Catholic faith and may have later played a part in the Gunpowder Plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and the Protestant James I with it. A number of his in-laws, the Throckmortons, were hung, drawn and quartered, along with Guy Fawkes. Sheldon's involvement was never proved. Perhaps his earlier experience had made him extra cautious. The family's unfortunate knack of backing the wrong horse in national conflicts reared its head again in the mid-17th century. Edward Sheldon was staunchly royalist during the English Civil War, and their stronghold of Bearley Hall came under attack by pirate forces. Despite the timely intervention of King Charles's nephew, Prince Rupert, the Sheldons were forced to destroy the fortified hall to prevent it falling into Roundhead hands. This marked the end of the family's occupation at Bearley, although the Sheldon Chapel continued as their final resting place for some generations. Edward Sheldon remained fiercely loyal to the crown and fought for Charles II at the Second Battle of Worcester in 1651. He is thought to have assisted in the king's escape to France via the famous oak tree at Boscobel House, and no doubt was well rewarded when the king was restored to the throne. Meanwhile, Redditch's needle-making industry received a boost with the arrival of William Lee. He had learnt his trade in London, but had fallen foul of the powerful Needlemakers' Guild for making needles from iron rather than high-cost steel. The Redditch area had no such restrictive body, and may also have had some needle-making skills inherited from the monks of Bordesley. By 1648, Lee had set up business in Studley. His entrepreneurial skills and the new manufacturing techniques he brought to the region saw it emerge as one of the leading needle-making centres in the country. In the early years, it was very much a cottage industry, with whole families, including children as young as 4, working alongside their parents in workshops attached to their homes. Typical of the needle-making firm set up in the 18th century was Henry Millward and Son. In their early trading days, home workers would collect wire from the Fountain Inn in Ipsley Street and return the following week with the finished product. The saddlers of Walsall and the glovers of Worcester all required needles, and soon the manufacturers of the Redditch area were looking for ways to increase production. Water power was the answer, and the fast-flowing River Arrow became crucial to the region's industry, as the old corn mills of the Arrow Valley were converted to scour needles. By 1730, Ipsley Mill was producing needles. The Millwards had taken over Washford Mill, and Forge Mill at Borsley was leased from Lord Windsor, the Earl of Plymouth, by manufacturer Richard Hemming. By the close of the 18th century, Redditch was by far Britain's largest needle producer, with almost 2,000 people in the area employed in the trade. The layout of the town itself, though, had hardly changed since the 16th century. At its heart was the green, where the stocks and whipping posts served as a warning to anyone thinking of causing trouble. A number of scattered houses sprawled along the main roads, which would then have been little more than dirt tracks. No less than 5 pubs served the mixed industrial and agricultural community, and Sunday prayers still involved the trek down Fish Hill to the chapel at Borsley. The 19th century got off to a stormy start. The cost of a long-running war with France had caused taxes to escalate. This, coupled with rises in the cost of basic foods, saw great political and social upheaval, and in 1800 brought rioting to the streets of Redditch by people near to starvation. The riots were eventually quelled by the Bromsgrove militia. By 1806, local gentry and businessmen had formed Redditch's own force to keep the people in check. This was, of course, before the days of an organised police force. By 1805, the people of Redditch had grown weary of traipsing down the hill to worship at the old chapel of St. Stephen. It was dismantled, and its masonry used to build the chapel on the green, at the heart of the emerging industrial community. A major hindrance to further industrial growth was the poor system of roads to and from Redditch. Turnpiking, the system of privately improving main highways and erecting turnpike gates and toll houses to charge those using them, had passed Redditch by. Locals doing business in Birmingham went via Bearley Road and along the old Icknield Street, a journey not without its hazards. In times of flood, the ford where the Arrow crosses the Bearley Road was a major obstacle. According to local tradition, the preacher John Wesley fell from his horse and nearly drowned trying to cross at this point. Links with the outside world improved a little in about 1810, when the Heath family started a twice-weekly wagon service from Unicorn Hill along Bearley Road to join the turnpike Ulster Road at the Cross and Bowling Green, and on into Birmingham. It quickly proved popular and became a daily service, although the Bearley Road ford continued to claim victims, including the son of Mr. Heath, the wagon operator, who drowned here. Another boost to the town's manufacturers in the early 19th century was the opening of the Birmingham-Worcester Canal. It was originally planned to build a spur to connect Redditch with the canal network, but the hilly terrain ruled it out, and traders had to suffice with a wagon service to the tardy Big Wharf. From here, Redditch needles found their way to Worcester, on to Bristol, and from there to all parts of the globe. The world continued to shrink, and from the early 1820s, Redditch folk could travel directly to London, although not exactly in luxury. The London wagon was started by Stourbridge glassmakers to carry their goods to the capital. To offset the costs, the wagon also accepted passengers along the route, which took it through Redditch, Ulster, Shipston and Oxford. A tortuous 4-day journey. Turnpiking finally reached Redditch directly in 1826 with the opening of the Great South Road. Stagecoaches now came into the heart of Redditch, and a number of the town's pubs enjoyed a new lease of life as coaching inns. Not that they necessarily needed the extra business brought in by the stagecoaches. Redditch men were quite capable of keeping the town's numerous inns busy, as wages in the needle industry were well above average. Pointers were the best paid, earning as much as £4 a week, when many other workers got less than 50 pence. This has to be balanced by the fact that a pointer's life expectancy was seriously restricted by his occupation. The average working life of a pointer was 8 years, and many died in their 20s. A stone built into the east wing of Forge Mill illustrates just one of the dangers of the job. Edward Murray was killed when his grindstone disintegrated while spinning at 3,000 revs a minute. The greatest threat, though, came from the dust they breathed in as they bent low over their wheels. Although they wore a scarf over their mouth, it could not prevent the fine dust created in the pointing process entering the lungs. Pointers rot, as the resulting disease was known, a form of silicosis, could kill within a few years. Not surprisingly, the pointers lived only for today and earned a reputation for hard living and rowdiness. A contemporary poem summed up their lives. There draws the grinder his laborious breath. There, coughing at his deadly trade, he bends. Born to die young, he fears no man, nor death. Scorning the future, what he earns, he spends. As well as drinking, bull-baiting and cockfighting were popular pastimes. But it was for boxing that the town became renowned. Redditch men's considerable reputation for fighting brought a steady flow of challengers, canal navvies from Tardybig among them, intent on fighting the best the town could offer. In the mid-19th century, Tom Paddock, a Redditch needlepointer, fought for the All-England Bare-Knuckle Championship. His opponent was William Thompson, or Bendigo, as he was better known. The fight lasted for 49 rounds until Paddock was disqualified for punching Bendigo when he was already down. For the less bloodthirsty, there were the Redditch horse races that took place every year on a course near Ipsley Mill until 1874. Curiously, any attempts to improve safety in the needle trade were resisted by the pointers themselves, on the basis that if conditions improved, their pay would drop. When mill owners tried to introduce extractors to get rid of lethal dust, the workers went on strike. Regardless of the health risks, the booming needle trade brought people flooding into Redditch, looking for work, and a population that at the start of the 19th century had stood at little more than 1,000, by the 1830s was approaching 5,000 and still growing. Hastily and poorly erected housing was built to cater for the influx of people, and Redditch fell victim to the scourge of the Industrial Revolution. A report by the Medical Officer of Health paints a stark picture. There are 1,540 houses thickly located, especially in some of the lower class streets such as Edward Street and Walford Street. In very many cases, sanitary conditions have been almost entirely sacrificed to cheap and imperfect construction. There is water in cellars, dampness of walls, absence of drainage, inadequate or absence of water supply, and wretchedly constructed toilets. The report also condemns the use of middens or cesspits. The midden system is unfortunately universal throughout the district. Out of 700 middens in the town, 458 were uncovered. There are 43 closets with more than 10 persons to each. There are 72 closets among 3,000 inhabitants, an average of 41.6 people to a closet, and there are 332 persons with no closet accommodation at all. The report singles out the new suburb of Headless Cross for particular criticism. The population is 2,000 with a total of 304 houses. There is an average of 17.5 persons to one closet. There are 105 tenants with no closet accommodation at all. There are also 91 tenants with no water supply at all. In 1832, between September and November, 50 townspeople died in a cholera epidemic, most of them buried in the old St. Stephen's churchyard at Bordesley Abbey. Appalling as some of the living conditions were, an even worse fate awaited those at the very bottom of the social pile. Another result of the rapid growth of industrial towns was the escalating cost of social welfare. In 1834, in an effort to reduce the bill, the government passed an amendment to the Poor Law, which emphasised indoor relief. The result was the introduction of the dreaded workhouse, administered by a board of guardians. The most wretched of Redditch's poor found themselves in the Bromsgrove workhouse, that in more enlightened times became Bromsgrove General Hospital. Links with the outside world improved still further in 1840, when the Gloucester to Birmingham Railway Company opened a station at Barnt Green. By 1844, a regular horse bus ran from Redditch to the station, and the railway was later extended to Redditch with a spur to Barnt Green. Advances in technology were also affecting the needle trade. The dependence of water to drive the mills had its drawbacks, as this 19th century report shows. In a long drought, week after week passed, with the entire trade on short time, if not absolutely still. The advent of steam power reduced the needle industry's dependence on water power, and new factories began springing up wherever there was space. By now the chapel on the green was too small to cope with the town's growing population, and a new parish church was built, dedicated to St. Stephen, retaining a link with the original chapel of Bordesley Abbey. Lord and Lady Windsor donated £2,000 towards the cost of the new church, which was consecrated in July 1855. A second church, dedicated to St. George, was built 20 years later to serve the southeastern part of town. The land for the new church was donated by Lord Windsor. By 1870, 350,000 needles a year were being made in the Redditch area, and the techniques used in needle manufacture became adapted locally to create thriving industries in fishing tackle and springs. The Public Health Act of 1875 marked the beginning of major social improvements in Redditch. The town's sewage disposal works were completed in 1881, marking the beginning of the end for the night soilman, who had the unpleasant task of hauling away human waste on carts from the crowded slums. In the same year, many of the town's streets were paved, and the following year the East Worcestershire Water Company created a mains water supply through Headless Cross into Redditch. Redditch manufacturers were quick to latch on to new trends and in the 1880s a number of them went into bicycle manufacture. Among them George Townsend and Co. of Hunt End. In 1891, Albert Eadie took control of the company and renamed it the Eadie Manufacturing Company. Eadie won a contract with the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield to supply precision parts for Enfield rifles, and shortly after used the name Enfield for a new range of bicycles. By the close of the century, the company was trading as the Enfield Manufacturing Company that was soon to turn its hand to manufacturing a legendary range of motorcycles. The final years of this century of unprecedented change were marked by two more important developments. In 1894, Redditch Urban District Council came into being, and the following year Smallwood Hospital was opened by Lady Windsor. Appropriately, the hospital was the product of needle-making. Edwin and William Smallwood were from a family of wealthy local needle manufacturers, and in their wills left legacies for the building of a cottage hospital in the town. The outbreak of World War I saw many of the town's manufacturers turn to producing for the war effort, in particular Enfield. They supplied the army with its well-known sidecar combination. Eadie later joined the board of BSA, and another famous range of motorcycles were produced in Redditch, many of them test-ridden through the Bearley Road Ford. With the war over, Redditch got back to its established trades, and by 1923 was a prosperous, proud little town of around 15,000 souls. A contemporary report tells us Redditch enjoys industrial fame, apparently quite out of proportion to the size of its population, for we hold it to bear somewhat unique distinction that a town of little more than 15,000 people should be known in all countries and markets of the world. During the Depression of the 20s and 30s, many people from badly affected areas, like South Wales and the North East, settled in still thriving Redditch, and many established local families can trace their roots to these areas. By now the motor car was making its presence felt, and in the 1930s the Redditch to Birmingham road was rebuilt to cater for the growing number of car owners. The first bus from Birmingham in the morning brought in the daily newspapers, and long after the practice stopped, the first bus from the city was still known as the newspaper bus. The car also had an impact on Redditch's industry, as some manufacturers diversified into metal panel pressing to supply the growing motor trade. The biggest change, though, came about as war clouds once again gathered over Europe. High-duty alloys of Slough HDA forgings, as they are better known, specialised in light alloy castings and forgings for the aircraft industry. It was felt that their location in the home counties would make them vulnerable to air raids, and a new factory was built on a 25-acre site on an ancient water meadow in Windsor Road, Redditch.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
A few days later, HDA's new factory commenced production. During the war, the company turned out 10 million aero engine pistons. At its peak of wartime production, 2,000 local people were employed here, and the town can be justifiably proud that the planes that won the Battle of Britain contained vital parts made in Redditch. After the war, Redditch settled into a comfortable dual existence. Its thriving industries ensured its prosperity, while its appearance was that of a pleasant market town, surrounded by countryside in all directions. But moves were already afoot that would eventually see it transformed, almost beyond recognition. The 1946 New Towns Act aimed to relieve overcrowding in industrial Victorian cities like Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool. The seed was sown. By the early 1960s, although the population of Redditch had crept up to around 30,000, it still bore the air of quiet prosperity. But the 1946 Act was about to take effect. On the 10th of April 1964, it was designated a new town to take overspill from Birmingham. The Redditch Development Corporation was set up and began the task of transforming the town. The surrounding countryside began to disappear beneath new housing and industrial estates as the population leapt to 70,000. A 104-mile road system was built to ease traffic around the new town, and in 1973 the first phase of the Kingfisher Centre opened, transforming the heart of the old town. As its expansion continued, in 1980 Redditch became a borough and incorporated villages like Beerley, Ipsley, Astwood Bank, Bradley and Stock Greens. Another effect of the town's rapid expansion was on its lifelong companion, the River Arrow. To protect the new town from the sort of flooding that had always been a feature of this section of the Arrow Valley, its course was straightened and a series of weirs created to control the flow. Part of the scheme involved the creation of the 28-acre Arrow Valley Lake, which provides the opportunity for some serious aquatic sport right in the heart of the modern conurbation. The valley now forms a delightful green corridor amidst the sprawling estates, where the lanes and the pathways of old Redditch form a network of footpaths and cycleways interwoven with the new. The countryside is never far away, and the relationship between the Arrow Valley and the people of Redditch is as intimate today as when the river turned their call, and later needle mills. Needlemaking is still an important part of the local economy, although modern techniques are more efficient and considerably more healthy than the old. But the old ways have not been forgotten. The last packet of needles was scoured at Forge Mill in 1958, and the building taken over by the local authority. Since then, it has been imaginatively developed as a museum, dedicated to the trade that took the name of our little town to all parts of the globe. This is the oldest surviving needle scouring mill in the world, with parts of it dating from the 1700s. In July 1983, Forge Mill was officially reopened by Queen Elizabeth II and is now the National Needle Museum. So, as Redditch prepares for the challenges a new millennium will bring, sites like this, together with the nearby Borsley Abbey Visitor Centre and a handful of committed groups and individuals, will ensure that its proud past will be very much part of its future.